So hiya, there's something that's been bothering me, and I want to start there instead of somewhere tidier. I've been writing a series called The Architecture of Fracture, and the more I sat with it, the more I realised the story I was telling wasn't really about a relationship ending. It wasn't even underneath everything a story about language. It was quieter than that. It was about what happens when the people closest to you start reading you through a map that doesn't match the ground you're actually standing on. We tend to treat misunderstanding as something ordinary, a cost of being human, two nervous systems bound to miss each other sometimes. And sometimes that's exactly what it is: small, forgivable, repairable by dinner. And sometimes misunderstanding stops behaving like an accident and starts behaving like a structure. It stops behaving like a moment and becomes a condition you live inside. It starts generating consequences of its own, consequences that have nothing to do with what actually happened between you and everything to do with how what happened got explained. I've lived that version. I've lived it inside of several different kinds of relationships. And this is the part I want to spend the real time on this morning. Inside rooms whose entire stated purpose was to understand me. Therapy rooms, consulting rooms, rooms with a box of tissues on the side of the table and a framed diploma on the wall. Being misunderstood there costs something different than being misunderstood by a stranger. Changes a person. And I want to try to show you how. So let me tell you what I mean by architecture, because I'm going to use that word a lot this morning, and I don't want it to stay abstract for you. Underneath everything you and I do with each other, every conversation, every silence, every "I'm fine," that both people know isn't quite true, there is a structure holding the whole exchange up. You don't see it most days. For the same reason, you don't see the studs inside of the wall. You only notice it when something goes through it. A hand goes through a drywall, a sentence that should have landed somewhere and instead just fell. That structure is what I mean by architecture. Most of us go our whole lives never looking directly at it because it's doing its job, it's holding. I started noticing mine the moment it stopped holding. And once you felt a structure fail underneath you, you can never quite unsee that it was there all along, underneath every ordinary Tuesday you took for granted. I think about now, the way I think about a house I lived in once in an earthquake. Nothing visibly changed. The walls stood, the pictures stayed on their hooks. And yet everybody who had been inside during the shaking walked through those same rooms differently afterward for months. That's what I mean by architecture. Is the thing you trust exactly as much as you've never had to test it. And underneath even that, there's something more basic still holding on. Before any of this had a story, before it had an edge, there was simply the fact of continuing. A line didn't ask to mean anything. Didn't ask to be witnessed, just kept going the way a pulse keeps going without asking anyone's permission. I've come to think that the floor of everything gets built on no identity, no language, just the plain stubborn fact that something was still there. And here's what I want to bring in, something a lot of you already know a little about, and a few of you have never heard of at all. There is a body of work, Marge Blanc's natural language acquisition framework. Most people who have encountered it at all encountered it through parenting. A parent notices their child isn't building language word for word the way the books describe, but in whole chunks. A phrase lifted from a favourite show, a whole sentence borrowed from a grandparent, delivered with original intonational impact. That child gets a name. Gestalt language processor. The parent learns the vocabulary, echolalia, scrapes, stages. It's good information, it's true information. And many think that's the whole of it, the whole map. I tend to think of it as a single room and a house I hadn't walked all the way through yet. Because what NLA, the framework, is actually describing underneath the vocabulary lesson is how a person keeps meaning available to themselves at all. Language is only where we happen to notice it. And we happen to notice it first there because language is loud, language is visible. It shows up early enough on a chart for someone to name it. Beneath the language is an ecology, a whole quiet arrangement of relationship memory and trust that decides from moment to moment whether reality stays coherent enough to live inside. Once I started looking there, instead of only at the words, the developmental stages stopped reading like a ladder toward more sophisticated speech. They started reading like a record of which worlds remain inhabitable to a person and which worlds have quietly closed their doors. Think about what actually happens the first time a child hands you a whole borrowed sentence. The exact cadence of a line from a film, delivered with feeling, aimed at you, meaning something the film never meant. That isn't a shortcut around language. That's a person reaching you with the only bridge they currently have that's strong enough to hold weight. The bridge is inherited. The crossing is entirely their own. There's something underneath even that bridge, though. Before a child can hand you a borrowed phrase, before pronouns arrive, before the world sorts itself into me and you, there has to be a turning toward, a first orientation, something over there, something not you. And the discovery that reaching across that distance changes what happens on both sides of it. Every gestalt a person ever hands you after that is really just a more elaborate way of doing that same first thing, reaching, being answered, finding out the reach was received. And this is where I want to bring something in that I've spent the better part of a year building out of my other Substack. I call it the 5-dimensional model. And this morning, I only want to give you a small piece of it because it's the piece that matters the most for where we're going. The fourth dimension in that model isn't time in the calendar sense. It's the relational field. Picture it as the invisible weather between people. The thing that tells you before either of you says a word, whether you're still reachable to the other, whether something that has happened yesterday is still allowed to carry weight today, whether repair is actually possible between you, or whether every disagreement resets the whole relationship back to zero. The way waves erase a line drawn in wet sand. Most people live inside that field their entire lives without ever once turning to look at it directly. It's the way fish lives in water, completely unconsciously. And I think gestalt processors feel that field constantly, whether we want to or not, because almost everything else is about how we think and speak and connect. Everything else depends upon whether or not that relational field is holding. When it's holding, something genuinely remarkable happens. Language gets playful again. Curiosity comes back online. Two people can hold a real contradiction between them, and neither one has to collapse to make room for it. You can walk out of a hard conversation and feel somewhere in your chest that something actually moved. The disagreement doesn't have to have vanished for that to be true. The relationship only has to have been strong enough to carry what happened and carry it forward into whatever comes next. You felt this outside of hard conversations too. You know the way our room changes when the instant someone you love walks into it. Before either of you has said a word, there's no sentiment. That's the field doing exactly what it does, radiating past the edges of a body, reorganizing the air around it, letting presence arrive before contact does. And you know the way a good conversation leaves something behind afterward, a kind of warmth still sitting there hours later, even though nothing technically is still happening. I've started calling that afterglow. No memory exactly, a kind of residue left in the field, doing quiet work long after the moment that caused it has ended. But that carrying forward, right, that has a name too. And in my model, I call it the fifth dimension. The old word for it, the word philosophers reached for long before I did, is Kairos, the eternal now. Kairos isn't simply remembering that something happened to you. It's remembering what that thing became later, once it had time to settle into who you are. Meaning, doesn't it travel toward you the way an arrow does, straight and on schedule? It curves, it waits for you to become spacious enough to hold it. I've written things at 46 that I did not understand until I read them again years later. And in that second reading, something clicked into shape, and it apparently had been waiting the whole time for me to wake and to take that meaning on. This isn't confusion. It's just simply how this kind of meaning moves. And here's what I need to tell you, because this is where it gets personal for me. I've lived what happens when that fifth dimension quietly goes dark. It doesn't happen the way people expect. It doesn't arrive as a fight or a slam door or one clean moment you can point to afterwards and say, that's when it broke. It's so much quieter than that. Conversations that used to open something new started instead explaining something old. Then they became defenses. I'd catch myself saying the same 3 or 4 things, same scripts, circling them, the way you circle a building looking for the door you swear used to be there. I hadn't run out of things to think. Understanding kept arriving and then dissolving in nearly the same breath, before either of us could stand inside it long enough for it to count as something we shared. The cruelest part of it is that the curve stopped completing. Meaning would start to arrive, start to send back towards something old enough to receive it, and then simply stop, part way. The way a wave stops short of the shore, it was clearly built to reach. No click, no settling. Just motion that never became recognition. From the outside, I imagine that looked like stubbornness, repetition. From the inside, it felt like building a bridge across the river that kept quietly carrying the foundation downstream as I worked. And here's the part I really want you to hear. What shrank wasn't my capacity. My availability to it did. These are not the same thing. And the difference between them is the entire argument I'm making to you this morning. Nothing developmental had been undone in me. Every capacity I'd ever built was still there, fully formed, waiting. The conditions that once let me reach them simply weren't there anymore. I've started calling that ecology instead of regression. A forest doesn't lose its roots in the winter. It loses its leaves. The roots keep doing the work you can see from the surface, the work that makes the next spring possible, long before there's a single green thing above the ground to prove it's happening. Now, I want you to imagine someone standing across from all of this who has never heard a word about what I just told you. Could be your partner, your psychologist, your psychiatrist, your marriage and family therapist, someone whose entire training tells them they're equipped to understand you, and who has genuinely never encountered the idea that gestalt processing might describe an adult's whole inner architecture. And not only how a 3-year-old learns to talk. They watch you lose access to language. They watch the familiar scripts come back. The same phrases over and over. They watch your bodies start speaking before your words can catch up to it. Tension in your shoulders that arrives before you've found a sentence for what's wrong. What do they conclude? Almost always, exactly what their training prepared them to conclude. You're defensive. You're avoidant. You're manipulative, dissociating, refusing accountability. You're emotionally immature. You're regressing. I don't think any of them arrive at those words because they're careless people. I think they arrive there because they're looking at you through an entirely different architecture than the one you're actually living inside. They're asking, why is this person behaving differently right now? The question that would actually reach you is a different one entirely. What conditions have changed such that capacities I already know this person has can no longer surface? One of those questions goes looking for pathology. The other goes looking for ecology. And which question gets asked in that room decides an enormous amount about what happens to you next. I think about a specific kind of moment, someone sitting across from a clinician trying to reach for a familiar phrase because it's the only sturdy thing left standing, and watching that phrase get written down as evidence of something wrong with him. Watching that one working bridge get logged as a symptom. Imagine reaching for the only thing that's still holding you up and being told the reaching itself is the problem. Now, here's what I need to tell you, kind of honestly and humbly, because I think it's the part people understand the least. For me, the frightening experiences were never simply about being misunderstood. They were about being confidently, authoritatively misunderstood. There's a particular kind of fear that shows up when someone holding real institutional weight, clinical training, credentials, a framed diploma on the wall, moral standing in the room, looks at you and explains your own experience back to you using meanings that were never meant to hold it. You're already running on reduced access to the very architecture you're trying to describe, and now someone hands you a fluent, confident, even compassionate-sounding explanation. Everyone else in the room nods along. Sounds plausible. Might even sound kind. It simply isn't your architecture. It belongs to a framework built for something else, applied to you because it's the only framework in the room. And once enough authority agrees on the wrong explanation, something genuinely dangerous starts to happen. You begin wondering whether you've imagined your own experience, whether the thing you felt so clearly alone at 2 a.m. was ever real at all. I think that may be one of the deepest forms of relational fracture there is. Not the original injury, the second one stacked on top of it, wearing the good intentions of everyone in the room. I want to be careful with you here because I mean this precisely, and I didn't want to hurt his accusation. Most of the people who did this to me loved me, or were being paid to help me, or both. I don't think a single one of them woke up intending to add a second injury to the top of the first. And that's exactly what makes it so hard to name. You cannot get angry at a malice you cannot point to. You're left holding something with no edges, no villain, just a room full of good faith that somehow left you farther from yourself than when you walked in. I don't think this is fundamentally a failure of compassion. I think it's a failure of perception. Every helping profession depends on architecture for making sense of the people it serves. Psychiatry has one, psychology has one, marriage and family therapy has one, education has one. Those architectures can be extraordinarily helpful and useful right up to the point someone arrives who experiences organized differently, so differently enough that the framework begins explaining away the very thing that it most needs to notice. And that isn't unique to autism or gestalt processing. It's one of the recurring problems in the history of knowledge. The observations arrive often long before the framework capable of reading them properly does. People keep describing the thing, clinicians keep recording the thing, families keep living beside the thing. What changes is the reader. Sometimes the evidence was there all along. We simply hadn't yet learned to see what it was evidence of. So that's why this series ended up living on sensual residue instead of here on the outside. That substack, that space begins from inside the body rather than from above it, which is its own kind of rigor, just a different one than the outside generally practices. academic language is genuinely good at describing structure once you've already climbed the hill and you can finally see the whole map spread out there below you. But somebody standing in the middle of the forest in the actual dark between the actual trees doesn't need another map right then. They need someone who recognizes the forest. Someone who says, yes, I know this place. I've been lost in it too. And here's what I found on the other side. That's become the quiet difference between my two spaces. The outside keeps asking, what is this architecture? Sensual residue keeps asking, what does it feel like to live inside it? And I don't believe either question can be fully answered without the other one standing beside it. So I want to leave you with this. The deepest injury in everything I've described this morning was never simply losing my words. It was living inside an architecture that no one standing next to me knew they were standing in too. Some lives don't fit inside 3 dimensions on the straight line of time. Mine doesn't. And I don't think the people I've been describing this morning do either. We're not asking anyone for less structure. We're asking for enough of it to stay whole. Now, if you've read the whole series, The Architecture of Fracture, any piece of what I've said today lands close to your life. As a gestalt processor, as a parent, as a clinician, as an educator, simply someone who loves a person they're struggling to understand, I genuinely like to hear where this landed for you, with the series, this video, in the comments. Because I think we're only at the very beginning of learning to see the architecture we've all quietly been living inside the whole time. So thank you. Have a great day.